So you mentioned whether it's a family business or a large corporation, that got me thinking, Flanders was a family business, but it was a pretty big family business. It wasn't always that way. So you guys scaled the business pretty significantly. And maybe tell us a little bit about what that journey looked like along the way.
Back then in 94, we had already started sowing the seeds of expansion. Coal mining in southern Indiana, southern Illinois, it wasn't as expanding as much. But at the same time, places like Wyoming and Texas were really doing that. That was an expansion. We just followed the customers, right? And we found that most of the products and services that they needed out there, we had as well. Following the mining industry again in Arizona, really got into, this was not intentional, but doing autonomous stuff. And this was, in the early 2000s, which was, now we hear about autonomous trucks and cars and things like that. But back then, these were blast hole drills. And we had some really smart engineers that almost on a dare, the customer said, hey, we'd really like to be able to operate this semi-autonomously.
Like at the beginning, it was growing out of necessity. It sounded like you guys were running out of customer base locally, so you grew. The engineering part where you talk about the back of the napkin, that sounds more like taking a chance, right?
Exactly.
Welcome to Making Sparks, the podcast where we ignite your passion for metal fabrication and fuel your business success. Join industry leaders and dive deep into the world of metalworking. From business insights to tips of the trade, Making Sparks is your forge of knowledge. During each episode, discover success stories, innovative solutions, and expert interviews that light the path to business growth. Subscribe today and grow and improve your company, and let's make sparks fly together.
Welcome back to the Making Sparks podcast. I'm Casey Velker. I'm sitting here with my co-host, Matthew Nix, and he brought a special guest today, and I'm going to let him introduce who that is.
Have you ever been referred to as a special guest before?
No, I feel special.
Well, you are special. Well, we're glad you're here, Joe. I'm Matthew Nix, and I am excited to introduce Joe Patterson to the show today, and known Joe quite a long time, and actually he was my executive coach at one time. So if we do anything good, he gets the credit for it. And if I screw it up, he didn't coach me good enough. But no, really known Joe a long time. Joe is previously a third-generation family business, and he's going to talk to us today a little bit about that story, and really neat business. And he's a local guy here. And so I see you got a Rose-Hulman shirt on today. So I'm assuming you're a Rose-Hulman grad.
Yeah, Rose-Hulman grad 2000. That's when I graduated Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering.
Very nice. Well, if anyone's listening and is not familiar with Rose-Hulman, it's a small technical college.
Yeah.
How would you describe it? I know what Rose-Hulman is, but how would you describe that?
Yeah, it's almost exclusively an engineering school.
Yep.
And
world-renowned engineering school.
Yeah, so I think my senior year was the first year where we had U.S. News and World Report, #1 college for engineering in the U.S. for undergraduate education without a doctoral program. And since then, I think it's still going. The streak's still alive. So 23 years later, still been #1. So pretty excited about that.
Yeah, it's a great school. That makes me think of the joke. So Casey normally does a dad joke for us to kick the show off, and he's a lot better at jokes than I am. But I really like this one, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of people. So do you know what a Purdue grad calls a Rose-Hulman grad?
I don't know, but I'm hoping it's bad about Purdue and Rose-Hulman. I don't know.
Boss. Have you heard that one before?
Yeah.
We have several Purdue engineers that are on our team. So we had a Rose-Hulman guy come in once and crack that
I'm going to have
joke.
to tell that one to my father-in-law graduated from Purdue, and I'm an IU fan. Obviously, I went to USI, but I'm one of those Southern Indian guys that's an IU fan. And I always have to kind of give him a little bit of crap. And one of the coolest things, though, is he took me to my first ever Purdue basketball game last year, which was IU at Purdue, and IU beat them. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah.
Right?
We used to have the joke where, I don't know if you remember The Far Side, those single panel cartoons. But there was one that was Midvale School for the Gifted, and it said pull, and you see this guy kind of putting his hand, like pushing on the door, trying to get in. So we crossed that out and put Purdue School for the Gifted. So we had a few jokes, but they didn't really know who we were. So it was like a gnat bothering an elephant.
But. Yeah, good stuff. Well, why don't you introduce yourself, Joe? Tell us a little bit about tell the audience who you are and your background?
Yeah, sure. Joe Patterson, born and raised here in Evansville, so just down the street from Poseyville. Like I said, graduated from mechanical engineering college in 2000. Went straight to work for the family business. So started doing, designs around electric motors, and really did that. That's for the family businesses, Flanders. And we were primarily a motor repair company. Had locations at that time in Evansville and Southern Illinois and Florida and Casper, Wyoming and Longview, Texas, and among other places, and then had field offices other places. But my role starting off was just jumping right into, hey, we need some shafts drawn up. Had somebody bugger one up real bad, and went from that to, hey, we make all the parts for these motors. Why don't we make our own motors, right? And so we made the coils and commutators, and then my older brother and I learned how to design motors from someone who had been doing it for quite a long time. So spent over a decade primarily doing that. Just customer would come to us and say, hey, I need a motor that has X number of horsepower at this number of RPM that fits in this envelope. Can you make it for us? Real custom type stuff, and did that for quite some time. We actually got pretty good at it, to the point where we bought the property right next to ours, which was a 250,000 square foot shoe warehouse at the time. We converted it, me and the team converted it into a manufacturing facility. So we did welding, machining, manufactured coils, laminations, all that stuff, along with having a team of engineers. So did that for a while, and then jumped around the business a bit. At one point, ran all of the repair shops in the U.S. We had managers local at each one, but was responsible for each one of those. Then was wanting to do something a bit different. So that's actually when I got first met up with Matthew. Was left the family business for a time, did some consulting. Performance coaching, but also did, financial analysis, and then did still my bread and butter that I couldn't get away from with electric motors and doing consulting on that as well. Got back, went to school during that time as well, got a master's of business administration. It was a joint program between University of Louisville and University of Kentucky. So we can make all the UK jokes we want because I don't really care about that. But, and I've probably offended some of your audience, but that's all right. Got that in 2017. And then right around that time, Flanders actually had an opening in Australia. So we had some significant business there, primarily following the mining industry. So packed me and my family up, and we moved to Australia for 2 years and got to run the Asia Pacific operations there. And we were talking about sticking around for another 2 years, and what does that look like? But that was right in January of 2020. And there were rumblings coming out of China about some new virus and all that stuff. So we made the decision to come back in March of 2020. And my kids went to school for 6 days before they said, okay, year's done, and homeschool and all that fun stuff. So straight into a pandemic, and still worked for Flanders at that point just as principal engineer for electric machines. And so I got involved in a lot of different stuff. And then we actually sold the business, I think it was 1st of March of 2021, private equity firm. I stuck around, was vice president of engineering for right at 18 months, and then decided it was time to move on. So doing some consulting now, looking at some other ventures. So that's kind of my story in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing that. I have several questions that came out of that. I definitely want to hear a little bit about Australia. I'm sure that got some neat stories there, but let's back up a little bit. So you left the business the first time to go out and do consulting. I'd be interested to hear a little bit about why you did that, what that looked like. I think a lot of our listeners are in closely held businesses or family businesses, and just tell us a little bit about the thought process that went into that and kind of what that looked like.
For sure. So, like I said, I graduated in 2000 and I got married in 2000, but went straight into, I think I had like 2 days off.
Mason, we're going to edit that. Say that again.
Graduated in 2000 and just went straight to work right after that. And at Flanders doing, the engineering pieces. And I had passions outside of that, but those were, kind of sidelined. And I thought, now's a good time. I'd felt this calling to do something different, look at it a different way. And it was a very difficult decision. Told my father, who was president at the time, and my grandfather was still alive at that time, the chairman of the board, told them, hey, I wanted to do something a bit different. And those were tough conversations, but really felt it was best, not just for me, but for the business. Hey, if there's opportunities for me to learn things other places, and that was part of the reason I was looking at consulting is, hey, what are some other places doing, right? And if I can bring those back to Flanders, that's great. Or if I never come back, I still had a bit of ownership. I still had a seat on the advisory board. So there were opportunities to
That's what I was going to
learn.
ask. You still had ways to influence the company outside of your employment.
Yeah, for my first several months, my biggest customer was Flanders because I was still doing quite a bit of engineering work for them from the motor design side. So there was ways to take what I was learning there. And then the MBA courses as well. We were a team of engineers, right? So we knew the technical pieces very well, but some of the business aspects, we hadn't had classical training in that. So I was able to take some of that into the business as well.
Yeah. So it was obviously difficult decision to leave, difficult conversations, but not necessarily hostile. I mean, it
No,
sounds
not at
like
all.
they were, in the end, somewhat supportive, at least, of it. And
Yeah, definitely very supportive and understood, me wanting to try something a bit different. And was, hey, anytime you want to come back, let us know. And, that did happen. That worked out.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, this is Adam Schmidt with ProFab Alliance, bringing you the sparks of knowledge for today's episode. If you're trying out for a sports team, you're not just going to take some written test, and it's a full tryout, and it could be over several days. Why aren't we doing that in our shops? Invite those candidates to come in and work a half a day or a full day where you actually pay them. Give them a couple projects to try out. See how they do, see how they mesh with the other team members. You may lose a couple of candidates that don't want to participate in that. Honestly, on the other side of it, they should want to do that because they want to come to a place that they'll enjoy working. So it's not only a tryout for them, but they're actually able to try out the company and see, is it a good fit for me as well? So overall, I think you need to, take those interviews a step further, get creative and think outside the box on how we can make sure that each one of our future team members is a great fit and will eventually retire with us.
I got a quick question. So you said your biggest customer was Flanders Consulting. Can you give a little insight on did that give you a little bit of a safety net? Because what I'm thinking is, some of our listeners, they may be people that are possibly looking to start their own thing. They're working for a company and they're looking to start their own thing. And a lot of people think that means that they have to cut ties with that company and have to, whether it's compete with them or whatever. But I know it's you. It was your family. But I mean, I've heard the stories in the other ways around where it's not family, but people.
Well, a little bit like our relationship.
That's what our relationship was. When me and Matthew partnered, I was doing marketing for Nick's companies, and
you were a W-2 employee.
I was a W-2 employee, and I went up to his office one day, and I was nervous and shaking, and I said, "Hey, I kind of want to take my freelance." I was freelancing a little bit on the side. Not much. I wasn't really doing much at all. But this, like you said, I had this feeling or calling or whatever that I should be running my own business, and it was nothing against Nick's. Actually, that was the hardest conversation. Was Nick's? I loved their culture. A lot of the people I worked with, they were just great people, and so. So I actually had someone on Facebook say, well, if you have that good a relationship with your boss, just go talk to him. And I said, okay. So I went and talked to you. And so I was just wondering, like, do you have any insights for, like, if someone is, like, if they kind of are thinking about starting their own thing, would you persuade them to talk to their bosses and tell them that this is on their mind?
I think you can build it up right in your mind that this is going to go really bad, and there's going to be screaming and yelling and all that stuff. But I think if you come out of a place for what you're trying to do, what's best for you, and also perhaps even the business, I found that even in family businesses or in large corporations, people want to understand what you're trying to do, right, and what you're passionate about. And if you're passionate about a certain thing, you're typically going to be really good at it, right? Because you'll work hard at it and you'll find ways to keep doing that thing and getting better at it. So for us, it was, okay, we hate to see you go, but I think you still have skills and abilities that can help us, right? And that's where that safety net that you talk about. But then you can have that conversation in a way that is not, double middle fingers on the way out and slamming doors and stuff. You can say, okay, here's what I'm looking for. And you can have a professional conversation around it. And I would strongly encourage if people are thinking about that to definitely do it.
So you mentioned whether it's a family business or a large corporation. I got me thinking, Flanders was a family business, but it was a pretty big family business. It wasn't always that way. So you guys scaled the business pretty significantly, particularly in the early 2000s. Maybe just give us a little bit of a flavor of what that looked like based on numbers, head count, whatever metrics you want to use to kind of paint a picture, and maybe tell us a little bit about what that journey looked like along the way.
Yeah, so I started full-time in 2000, like we talked about, but my original hire-on date was 1994. And like I tell everybody, I don't remember ever being asked to go to work. I was pretty much told, hey, you're going to come in and wash trucks and clean up and do all that good stuff. But back then in 94, we had already started sowing the seeds of expansion, right? We primarily, more than 50% of the business was mining. And at that point, coal mining in southern Indiana, southern Illinois had kind of dried up some or wasn't as expanding as much. But at the same time, places like Wyoming and Texas were really doing that, going after it pretty hard. So that was an expansion. We just followed the customers, right? And we found that most of the products and services that they needed out there, we had as well. So we could move out there, take the mining know-how and put that in different places. But then, hey, we still have this shop here. Let's transition what is around that's heavy industry that's similar. Well, a lot of steel mills, aluminum that were within a 5 or 6 hour drive, paper, utilities, those kinds of things. So we could still service additional customers, keep the customers that are mining centric out there. So we did some expansion through geographic expansion. And then around that time, we had, following the mining industry again in Arizona, really got into, this was not intentional, but doing autonomous stuff. And this was, in the early 2000s, which was, now we hear about autonomous trucks and cars and things like that. But back then, these were blast hole drills. And we had some really smart engineers that almost on a dare, the customer said, hey, we'd really like to be able to operate this semi-autonomously. A couple of really smart guys figured out a way to do that, kind of on back of the napkin type of things. We ended up, over the course of a short period of time, turning that into a product. So it was, won't go into all the technical bits and pieces of it, but taking that innovation and then going from back of the envelope to actually creating a product out of it and then selling it repeatedly over the course of, years. So those two things are kind of how we ended up in Australia and South Africa and a lot of different places, is taking what we had and saying, hey, there's markets for this, and applying it other places.
So some of it was just, like at the beginning, it was growing out of necessity. It sounded like you guys were running out of customer base locally, so you grew.
Exactly.
But then the engineering part where you talk about the back of the napkin, that sounds more like taking a chance, right?
In that situation, the autonomous drills, it was almost like a high reward, very low risk, because the drill had actually caught fire, not by anything we did, right? The customer did that, and they said, hey, we're going to rebuild it because we can't buy a new one. So we'll rebuild it, and while we're doing that, why don't you guys come in and put all the sensors and all the bells and whistles that you need? And so we did that, and it was one of those happy accidents that worked out really well.
Transitioning from a historically service business to a product business is quite a transition. Can you talk a little bit about the challenges that, because we're even working through that a little bit within our own company. I mean, we're historically a service business, and we're not that we want to move away from that, but trying to move into more of a product focus. So talk about some of the pitfalls, challenges. What would you do differently?
Yeah, for sure. The way I like to think of it, right? And I like to cook on Sundays or whatever, and I like to make chili. But I've never made the same pot of chili twice, right? Sometimes I use an extra thing of beans, or sometimes I use pork instead of ground beef, right? So, but I try and make it work. And so I think service business is a lot like cooking. You kind of make it work and do whatever you got to do to get so that everybody's satisfied and at a reasonable cost. Product service is like baking, right? And if you want to make a really good cake, you have to sit there and measure everything out, right? And amount of butter and flour and all that stuff. And you got to make sure the humidity's right, and, very, very detailed process around how you do that. And you have to do it the same way every time. And it's just a completely different mindset. And so going from services to products is really a much different mindset. The good enough is not good enough kind of thing. That is, I think, the best way to think about it. And so you have to get really good on process. You have to get really good on training. You have to get really good on things. And then you have to quit innovating, right? And once a product's done, it's done. And then if you want to make a better product, okay, that's a different process. So you got to, almost freeze what your product is. You can still work on it in the background, but you're selling this product for over, you wouldn't want to get a Ford F-150. The innovations on it are different every time. No, you want or McDonald's cheeseburger, or however you want to think about it. So for us, that was definitely a mindset shift. And you have to, the way you were doing things is not the way you can keep doing things. And having a bit of separation there, I think, helps as well.
Yeah, good stuff. So you had a very decentralized model. So I'm very interested in that. And maybe for those that aren't familiar with what we're talking about not only geographically, but the way the org chart is structured. So, some companies might have locations spread out geographically, but they have a very centralized org chart. And I believe, I'm not misspeaking here, that you guys were advocates of the decentralized model. We are as well. And so,
yeah.
So talk a little bit about that, and then maybe even how does that play into this? You've got this decentralized service business, and then you've got this product focus that you're trying to drive at the home base, more of a corporate initiative.
Right. Yeah. So and we had that debate over years, right? A centralized model versus a decentralized model. There's benefits and drawbacks to each, but from a service standpoint, I can't stress a decentralized model. If you have, especially in geographic locations, what we found, right, is Evansville's market was much different than Lakeland's market, which is much different even than Southern Illinois' market. And for a centralized office, no matter where you put it, to understand those differences was nearly impossible. You have to have a good leader in place that understands that and give them autonomy to make decisions with the appropriate ground rules, right? And how much money can we make, and got to have cultural fits and all that good stuff. But a centralized model for products is far better, because you can't make individualized decisions based on just what's available to you, because you get different products. It's that Ford F-150 again. You can't have AM, FM radios in one and just AM radios in another. No, they got to all be the same. And that causes headaches and problems, so you do need to centralize some of those functions. But for a service model, 100%, the decentralized model makes most sense.
So were you sort of a hybrid of both then?
That's where we ended. That's where we ended up. Was a bit of both. Centralized. There's things that you do need to centralize, especially if you're in the U.S., like HR functions, right? You need to be able to have, or accounting, definitely, right? Have one set of accounting books. But we kind of did a bit of a hybrid where, okay, product development was more centralized, and product management from cradle to grave type stuff was more centralized, but decentralized in pretty much everything we could.
Yeah. Interesting.
And call me dumb, but in case someone hears this podcast and hear one of our other episodes, either one of you, can you guys give just a quick definition of decentralized versus centralized? Like, basically, it's like having management spread apart versus all in one, right?
No, it's not. That's the point I was trying to make earlier. It's not necessarily just as management spread apart geographically. They could be spread apart geographically, but you could still have somewhat of a centralized model It's more about the autonomy that you have at that specific location. And well, let me give you an example. So if you have engineers or estimators or project managers in a centralized model, they might be situated at other places geographically, but they would report into the head of engineering in the home office or the head of estimating in the corporate office and so forth. In a decentralized model, those folks are all going to report to a localized leader. So you're trying to get as many functions as possible to be reporting up through that location. You're trying to give the leader of that location as much autonomy as possible to make local decisions, down to, of course, the hiring and firing of the team. It's not someone at the corporate office deciding what engineers we hire. It's the person leading that location. And I've read and heard, that it makes sense to me that there really isn't a right or wrong method. They both have been proven quite successful. It's really just that you really need to pick one or the other. And that's why I was kind of asking Joe to talk about, doing both. And so, yeah, we have accounting is centralized, sales and marketing is centralized, pretty IT, of course, HR, everything else is decentralized. And that's something that it does have challenges, because if you have, for example, in our business, we have our engineers and our detailers. Most of our audience would know what a detailer is. Our detailers are all reporting through those specific locations. So guess what we have? We have a standardization issue. So we're working on, we need to standardize across all our locations. Everybody reports up through that location. So everybody's doing it just like you said, they're all making the cheeseburger a little bit differently. And so there is a need to standardize some things. But you can do that without breaking the decentralized model. What we've actually done is we have one person within our company that is based at the home office that's responsible for that among other things. But these folks don't report directly to him, but it's his job to help standardize it across the company.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say, you were saying like a lot of people say you have to choose one or the other, but that was interesting that you guys kind of have a hybrid model. And in my mind, from a guy who really doesn't, my business has nothing to do with that kind of stuff, that I feel like a hybrid model wouldn't be a bad idea if you could.
It just complicates things.
Yeah.
Definitely. And when you start getting into the nitty gritty and into the weeds, then it becomes, we had a lot of debate about sales as an example. Should that be centralized or not? And where you come into is what's incentivized, what's not. And, if I can get a salesman that's focused on my area, that's great. That works out well for me. But is he driving past 3 locations to get to the one good one that would benefit other places, right? And those are the kind of, I think in my mind,
getting laser focused on one product,
right,
and neglecting the others
that could help others out, right? And for me, the way I think about it, it's a tension you manage. I don't think it's a problem you solve, right? I don't think you just go, okay, now this is the way we do it, and then we're always going to do it this way forever and ever. Amen. Hey, we may have to make changes where we're having issues, and like I said, sales. Okay, let's tweak that a little bit, and how does that work? But I don't think there's, to Matthew's point, I don't think there's one right answer.
We talked about joining the business, leaving the business, coming back to the business, going to Australia, coming back from Australia. You guys scaled the thing significantly. I mean, how many team members at the peak did you have?
We had over 800 internationally.
Yeah, 800 folks. So this is a significant size family business, and you ultimately decide to the family exits the business, sell it to private equity. So we understand. You can't tell us all the details. We're not asking you to air your dirty laundry, but just tell us a little bit about what that process looked like, and
sure.
What you can share about that, because I think what we're talking about here is taking a 3rd generation family business, transitioning from a service to a product focus, scaling it internationally, and eventually exiting the business. And so I think that's quite an intriguing journey for a lot of folks. So to share what you can about the end of the journey.
Sure. So at that point we had quite a few family members as owners. Some worked in the business, some did not. Some were in leadership positions whenever they did work in the business, some were not. And so we had some of that friction going on, and frankly, there's tension involving all of that. What we worked through was, okay, where do we want to be right at the end of the day? And through some of that, we said, look, I don't think we can't hit our goals where we want to be and do it alone, right? And you really run into capital constraints and trying to keep up with expenses and changing marketplace. And, like I said earlier, we were following coal or mining. Quite a bit of that was coal. Well, the coal market has taken a bit of a hit. So how do we transition and keep everybody happy and, oh, by the way, continue to grow? And that's where we said, hey, we can't do all of these things. It's just impossible.
Can't serve all these masters.
No, too many masters. And so that's when we started looking hard at what does it look like to transition some ownership. So we went down several paths, right? Team did a good job of exploring really all the options. We looked at an ESOP, which is, I forget the acronym, but it's employee
stock option program.
Yes.
I think.
Yeah. We looked at that. We went down that path pretty far. There were positives, just like with everything, positives and negatives associated with that. Looked at minority stakeholders, positives and negatives with that. What we ended up with was, I think, where everybody wanted to be. The private equity made the most sense, right? So we still were able to retain some ownership, but did transition some of that out. And again, positives and negatives associated with that. But I think overall, it's helping to transform the business to where it needs to be. And you can struggle with that. You get within a family business, you get pretty locked in on, hey, these are the way things ought to be, and the way things were back in the day and should be now. And having some outside help come in and evaluate that was I think beneficial.
So did they come in a majority position right out of the gate?
Yeah.
I think when people hear private equity, a lot of times their skin starts crawling right away. And I mean, there's plenty of horror stories out there. I've heard some great stories too. And I think private equity is no different than anything else. There's great ones and there's shitty ones, I mean, it's just like anything. But I do think the one thing I've noticed as I've just listened to other folks and studied this is that it seems like whether they're the good ones or the not so good ones, the one value that they seem to bring to the table that I think we can all take away is they look at things from an objective standpoint and look at it through the lens, usually through the lens of bottom line profitability, which is where they get a bad rap. And that does need to be balanced. But I think sometimes as family businesses, we can go too far the other way. And I'm guilty of this at times, is that, a lot of us are very passionate about what we do, and we feel a sense of calling, and we're trying to build this great organization. And I truly do look at profitability as like a necessary thing, right? Like I don't really care about that.
Right.
It's not what gets me excited.
Right.
It's a means to a better end. For some people, they like buying the brand new machines, and for some folks, it's they like inventing the new product. For me, I get excited about building a great team and the excitement that comes around that. But still, you can get too focused on that and not enough focused on the balance sheet or on the bottom line. And so they bring that to the table to really get folks laser focused on the financial health of the organization, and that usually is a good thing. Mm-hmm. So I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit. I think we sometimes neglect that.
Yeah, it's easy to take your eye off the ball, right? For sure. Especially you can get caught up in, let's expand this and let's do all these great things and do all that. But hey, you're not keeping an eye on debt schedules and, like I said, balance sheets, and private equity is very, very focused on that. And that's their role.
They have less emotion.
They have so much less emotion, and then they're anyone that is involved or that works there is incentivized around that. So they're incentivized or matched with what the goals are. He said you can always take things too far and focus only on that, and miss
treat people poorly, and
right. And
that's the horror stories you hear.
Exactly, and you can miss a lot of that stuff, which again, positives and negatives with all that stuff, but. I think if your listeners are looking at that, I would suggest, hey, explore it. Right? There's no harm in exploring that, and no harm in exploring ESOPs or even having venture capitals or a silent partner or a thing like that. If your vision is bigger than what the bank will allow you,
yep.
And so I would suggest doing that.
Yeah. No, that's great feedback. For us, one of the mechanisms we've used to accomplish. We haven't necessarily been looking for capital to expand at this point. Well, I mean, we need capital, but that hasn't been our constraint. But I have been very conscientious about, are we run the business in a professional manner? And it's not just feeding our aspirations, or it's not just a personal or family piggy bank. You see all those ends of the spectrums out there. And so what we've actually done is we have several of people on our leadership team that are actually minority partners in the company. Mm-hmm. And so what that's done is, and we didn't do that as a means to raise capital, but what it does is it makes us much more disciplined about how we run the business. We've assembled a board now, and we have structured governance, and we need to be, and I need to be accountable to those other folks too, and we need to generate a proper return. But it's folks that are on the inside, that's one of us, is how I say it, that also believes in the way we're going to do things and how we're going to get to the vision statement. And so it's not just the bottom line, but it does add that component of it. So there's a lot of different ways to bring those into the business. And sometimes I think private equity is a fine way to do it. And some folks bring them in a minority position and are able to accomplish what they want to.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think keeping the main thing, right? And the example I always use is, Chick-fil-A does a lot of Christian business, and they do a lot of great things, but nobody would really care about them if the chicken wasn't great, right? Yeah, they would just be some shack off the side of the road that three people show up at. So you got to have great chicken, but they also are very focused on what they're trying to do, right?
They actually don't have the best chicken sandwich. That's the other thing, but it's good enough.
It's good enough.
There's plenty of chicken sandwiches out there that are better than Chick-fil-A's.
Right.
But it's good enough, and it's that good every single time.
I was gonna say I could talk to Chick-fil-A a little bit, because we're on a diet thing, and they have some pretty healthy chicken options. But the one thing that you get at Chick-fil-A is, no matter which location you go, you're not gonna get some bad piece of chicken. It's gonna be
very
the
consistent.
same,
consistently
good,
above average.
That's fine. I'm fine with that.
Yeah. And so, but I would say the Cathy family also realizes it's not just about money, right? And they have aspirations outside of that. And so the business is a means to help with that. But they also keep an eye on the quality of the chicken, and they also make a profit.
Yeah. Because if they quit doing that, they can't do the other things they want to do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Good stuff.
So Joe, I think we're going to be wrapping up here soon, but kind of our mission for Making Sparks is to grow and improve, help fabrication business grow and improve their businesses. And so I'm going to ask you. Normally, people ask you for 3 tips. I'm going to give you just 2 tips. But if a business is looking to scale, maybe not from what you guys did to 800 employees, but just in general, I mean, Matthew has talked about how they've scaled in other episodes and stuff. But I think from your perspective, what are 2 things that you're has to happen for you to scale? I heard, I'm not going to put any answers in you, but I'm going to say what I heard as you were talking was, one, you had some really talented people, these engineers and stuff, that allowed you to get into some more product type things. And then the second, I'm trying to remember what the second part was, but there was a second part that I remember you talking about that did it. But what are 2 things that you think they could
must have
to scale? For sure, you've got to have. They talk about the right people on the bus in the right seats, right? That's a big piece. And sometimes those people are not on the bus yet. And so sometimes you may have to bring in other people and that kind of input and shift seats around, and that's okay, right? As long as we're getting where we need to go. And I would say get engaged, have some sort of outside eyes looking at what you're doing, right? So we got pretty involved in some engineering conferences locally. There's TSMA, things like that. And if you can learn from other people is a big deal for us. So, with TSMA, as Tri-State Manufacturers Alliance, was helpful because you could see how other people were using their business. Hey, I'm not going to make tents, but I know what they're doing. I can apply 10% of what they're doing over here, and being able to take that and apply it here, that helps grow your business. Profab Alliance, I think, is another way you can take what other people are doing and apply it to other things. But having a second set of eyes, just looking at, okay, are we doing this the right way? Right? Just having that check. Yeah, everything looks good. Okay, full bore, and we're headed off. So
yeah, good stuff. One third thing I would like to add to that, I think is really important, is there's got to be a problem in the marketplace that you're solving. I read or heard somewhere that said the limit to your scalability is in direct proportion to the problem you're solving in the marketplace and your unique ability to solve it. And so I think, you got to have that first and foremost, and then the things you mentioned are very, very critical and great points to add along to that.
Totally agree with that. Yeah.
Well, Joe, we appreciate you coming on Making Sparks. How can people follow along? I mean, are you on social media at all? Or, I mean, can people follow your consultant? So I didn't know if there's anything that they can do to kind of be in contact with you.
Yeah, Telios Development. And I'll spell that really slowly because I should have thought of that. But TELEIOS Development, and it's Joe P at TeliosDevelopment.com. If you're interested or whatever. For anything that I do, I don't really have a social media presence or anything like that. I guess I'm old school like that. But
Well, thanks for joining us, Joe. That was very insightful stuff.
thanks for having me. I had a lot of fun.
Hey, Matthew, if you're not making sparks,
You're not making money.
bam. Hey, we're getting better at this.